Okay? All right. So our webinar today is about the ONIP. There's a recent announcement just a few weeks ago, that the OINP is closed for this year. And so now we are recording this, and if you want to go back and look at this webinar again, we will be putting this on our website as well. Okay? All right. So first of all, I wanted to talk about what the closure actually means. Okay? First of all, let's talk about what the closure means. So every year, the Ontario government gets a certain quota from the federal government, where the federal government says to the province, okay, we are going to allow you to select a certain number of people. And these people you can select for your provincial nominee program. Okay, and that's what an OINP is. It's the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program. So the Ontario gets to select people for that program. In 2016, that quota was 5,500. And what the Ontario government says is, well, you know what? This year, our quota for 5,500 is almost about to be filled up. And it's something where they are communicating as well to you, but also to the federal government, that maybe our province, we need more for our quota, okay? And is that because our quota is going to be almost filled up, then we are shutting down the following streams. And they are some of the most popular streams, okay? So the master's and the PhD programs are shut down. The employer pre-screen are shut down, and those are to deal with the skilled worker and international graduate programs. And also the express entry, the human capital priority stream, that's the one for people who have over 400 points that may get invitations to apply. Well, that stream is now also shut down, so that they're not going to invite any more people. Now, this is not forever, okay? The government has said that they are probably going to, they are in the process of negotiating right now with the federal government, and they anticipate that a new quota will be given to them possibly in November. So they have said, well, we probably might reopen this program in November. It's not for sure, but it is a possibility, okay? And we would anticipate them to open up at least some of the programs, at least for next year for sure, okay? Which ones are they? How many people are going to be able to apply? That is still up in the air. So one more thing that you have to be aware of is, in previous years, when the government has said, oh, you know what, our quota is filled, we're not going to be processing any more applications, they have still accepted applications. So for example, in 2014, when the quota was filled, they said, well, we are going to, you can still submit your application, you just know that we're not going to process it this year. But the new procedure now is that they won't even accept applications anymore, okay? So it's moving towards something like what the federal government does with the quotas. If the quota is filled, then your application, if you submit it after the quota is filled, then your application is going to be returned. And we'll discuss what that means in terms of strategy, because it's no longer the case that you can just hope that, well, we'll just wait for a while, we'll have our application and we'll just wait for a while. Now it's about getting your application in, first come, first serve, making sure your application is in before other people's are in there, and making sure that your application is perfect so that it is not returned, because you won't get a second chance. Okay, so we can deal with this, okay? Don't panic. There are still ways to deal with this, and this is what the seminar is about. How are we going to deal with this situation? Okay, so there's 3 main strategies that I will be speaking about today. The first one we need to talk about, if you are already in Canada and you have your work permits or your study permits or your status in Canada, then we need to maintain your temporary status if you want to stay in Canada, okay? And it's very, very important that you maintain your current status and don't go out of status. We're also going to look at alternatives for PR, permanent residence. The OINP is not the end-all and be-all. There are a few other things that I want to present to you today. What I present to you today, of course, is not going to be everything that's out there. Some of the more prevalent ones that we have been recommending to people, but today, what I'm telling you about is general information. Everybody has their own plan, and I would highly recommend that you come for a consultation and we do an individual plan for you. But I will present some alternatives for PR today and give you a general sense of what's out there. And finally, we are going to look at the OINP, okay? Because it's not a forever closure. If you have temporary status until next year, it is something that could still be a possibility for you. And right now, during this 6-month period or so, before the program opens, is not a time to just, sit back and relax until it opens. If this is a possibility for you, now is the time to prepare the application, because we have to submit this application as soon as the program opens, so that you can make sure that your application is in on time before the quota closes. Okay. So now let's talk about maintaining status. First of all, and if you've attended any of my previous seminars before, I always like to talk to you guys about maintaining your status and also to use implied status. Sometimes you can use it to just buy yourself a little bit more time, okay? What implied status is if you have temporary status in Canada. For example, if you have a work permit, okay? Temporary status, work permits, study permits, visitor status, okay? If you have that, you will always only have, it's temporary, so you'll always have an end date. So now let's pretend, let's say that I have a work permit and it's going to expire on June 30th. If my work permit expires on June 30th and I apply to extend it, even if it's on the day of or day before, okay? Let's say June 29th. And I apply to extend it, I'm not going to get an answer right away. It may be a few weeks. It may be a few months before I get an answer. Well, until I get that answer, I have status and I have the legal ability to continue to work if I have applied for a work permit extension, okay? Not a visitor extension. If you apply for visitor extension, you only get visitor status, implied status. You have to apply for the same thing. If I applied for a work permit extension, then I have the legal right to work until I have received an answer. So let's say I have a work permit. It expires on June 30th. I apply to extend it on June 29th. I don't get an answer, for example, until August 31st. I can continue working, okay, even if my application on August 31st is denied because I didn't qualify for another work permit. Even if it is denied, I can continue to work legally until that decision is out, until August 31st. Now that is something that buys you time, but you have to make sure that you apply to extend your application in time and that you met the requirements, you submitted your application, and you did it properly to submit your application, okay? And that helps you buy some time. Now, the second thing that you might think about is tag teaming with your spouse. Now, who is your spouse? Well, there are two categories, really. There is your spouse who you're married with, and then there is also your common law spouse. So your common law spouse is someone who you have lived with in a conjugal relationship, so in a marriage-like situation, not as roommates, of course, but just with your boyfriend or girlfriend for over 1 year. If you've lived it with them for over 1 year, they are your common law spouse, whether you like it or not, okay? Now, there are some advantages to having a common law spouse who, common law spouse who is in Canada and has legal status, okay? If they have Canadian citizenship or spouse or permanent residence, you know, we can talk about spousal sponsorships later on. But if they don't have, you know, if they're not Canadians or permanent residents, they're still extremely, their status, if they have work permit or study permit or visitor status, they are still extremely, in immigration, what I feel is valuable for immigration's sake, okay? Because if they, say you have your postgrad work permit, your spouse gets an open work permit because you have, if you have a high-skilled job, your spouse will get an open work permit. Or if you have a study permit, your spouse will get an open work permit, okay? Now, say your work permit is about to expire. Well, guess what? What are we going to do then? Well, if your spouse, we reverse that. If your spouse goes to study, then you can get an open work permit based on your spouse, okay? So we can use things like that to think outside of the box as to how we might be able to help you keep your status in Canada while we are waiting for you to qualify or waiting for you to get your permanent residence. And there are other ways to get work permits. So let me now move to that, and we can talk about other ways to get your work permits. Okay, so let's talk about that. First of all, here are some common work permits. I'm going to first talk about open work permits. They are my favorite work permits because they allow you to work anywhere you like. You're not restricted to a particular employer. A lot of you, most of you would probably have heard about the postgrad work permits. Those are the work permits that you get after you've studied in Canada for a period of time. If you study in Canada for 2 years or more, you get a 3-year open work permit. If you studied in Canada in a program of 1 year, you get 1 year, unless you have studied previously in another program for 1 year or more, and then in the second program, you get a 1 year. Sorry, hold on for 1 second. We just have some, I'm just doing this in my office and we have some people outside. Okay, so if we have if you've studied in a program of 1 year or more, and then later on you want to take another course. Well, if that second course is 1 year or more, and it is in a graduate program. So that program, it can be in a college, it doesn't have to be in a university, but that program must require a degree or diploma, a post-secondary degree or diploma first as a prerequisite before you take that. So for example, if I did a college degree here, and then later on, because I had a bachelor's degree at home, I did a 1-year master's after that. Well, because I've done that 1-year master's, I would be eligible for a 3-year postgrad work permit. Okay. Now you can only get 1 postgrad work permit in your entire life, so make sure that you don't waste that opportunity. The second one we've talked about before, it's a spousal work permit. So if you are married to someone who has a study permit, or someone who has a work permit and that person is working legally in a high-skilled work permit, in a high-skilled position, then that person would be entitled to you would be entitled to a spousal work permit, and you can work anywhere you like, which is a very valuable work permit as well. Of course, while you are studying, if you have a study permit, you can work part-time anywhere you like. You don't need a work permit for that anymore. You can work 20 hours a week. Finally, there's also the international experience class. That is if you are a national of certain countries, Australia, UK, Ireland, a lot of the European countries, Chile, Korea, Japan. Some of those countries, if you're a national of that country, you may be entitled to a work permit, and you're under a certain age. Basically, those work permits, there's only a few thousand a year that are issued to nationals of each country. You have to look and see, whether or not your country, if you're a national of that country, you can qualify, and also when that program opens. Oftentimes now, when they're opened, they're only open for a few hours sometimes, if not a few days, before they're all snatched up. Okay? Now, this is exciting. There is a new work permit called the Francophone work permit that just opened today. If you are on our email list, we will be sending out a email blast about this. We sent out an email blast a couple months ago when they had announced they were going to announce it, and now we have the full details about how this is going to work. We're going to be sending out an email blast about this as well. For those of you who aren't on our email list, it's a list that we maintain to just send out news about immigration, because the news that I tell you today, the laws that I tell you today, it's true today, but because immigration laws change so fast, it could change tomorrow. It may not be true next month. It probably won't be true next year. So the only way that we are able to update people on important immigration news is by sending out email blasts. And so we will be sending one out very shortly on the Francophone work permits. And this is an exciting work permit because, especially if you speak French. If you speak French and you use it on a daily basis, then if you want to work outside of Quebec in Canada, you actually get an open work permit. Okay, so essentially, you don't get an open work permit, you get a work permit to work for the employer, but it is very, very easy work permit to get. Okay, so if that is your case, then this is a very good option for you. A bridging work permit, you will get this as well if you've passed a certain stage for permanent residence. So if you have a PNP nomination already in your master's or PhD program, or if you have an invitation to apply from your express entry program where you've already submitted your application, and you have a work permit right now, you can apply for a bridging work permit. We will talk about this a little bit more later on. Okay, this is a way to help you maintain your status. Now, quickly going over employer-specific work permits. These are work permits where, now I should have, the Francophone, and I should have thought about this. Francophone should be in the employer-specific work permits, not in the open work permits, because they are employer-specific, okay? But they are very easy to get. And maybe that's, my brain was thinking about putting them in the open work permits. So they're not open, they're employer-specific. So some of the other employer-specific work permits where you can only work for that employer that's specified on your work permit is the perhaps infamous Labor Market Impact Assessments, or LMIA. Those work permits are based on applications that are submitted to another department called ESDC. It's called the Labor Department in Canada, where the employer has to show that they can't find another person who can do that job. There is also one other way we can do it. If you want to own your own business, then if you can show that your business is going to create job opportunities for Canadians, then you're exempt from the recruitment aspect where you have to show you can't find a Canadian to do this job. Okay, so the Labor Market Impact Assessment is a tricky application. Not everybody can do the labor market, not every position will get a positive assessment. We will need to see what, if you want to do this, we will need to see, and speak with your employers to see whether or not this is a good option for you. Provincial Nominee Program, I keep coming back to it because, it's not closed forever, and we will talk about it some more, but you can get a work permit based on the Provincial Nominee Program if you have already been nominated, okay? Another very nice one is the Free Trade Professional Program. So if you, under NAFTA, so if you're Mexican or American, or if you are from Chile, Colombia, Peru, Korea has one as well. And so if you're of those countries and you want to work in Canada as a professional, there are various lists of professionals. For example, management consultants, computer systems analysts, engineers, and the list goes on. You don't need to get a labor market assessment. The labor market assessment is the pain in the neck that, we often try to see if there are other ways to get it. If you are, for example, an engineer and your nationality is Mexican, then if you have a job offer to work in Canada as an engineer, we can get you that work permit very fast. We can even have it applied at the border. Okay, so that's one more application. And then there's the intercompany transferee. This is where you have a company overseas that is related to a company in Canada, and then we can get you a work permit by transfer, because you are transferring from, you've worked in that company for over 1 year in a senior management, or that you have specialized knowledge, then we can transfer you and get you a work permit to work in Canada for the Canadian company. Now, this is normally done for big companies, but it can also be done for startups. So for example, if you have a well-run established company overseas and you want to start a Canadian branch in Canada, then we can get you a work permit to work in the Canadian branch over here. All right, so those are some of the work permits, and those are some strategies that we might advise to maintain your temporary status. Now, I'm going to run through the permanent residence, and time just flies by. I want to have enough time for question and answer at the end of this, but we're already at the halfway mark almost. Okay, so let's talk about the permanent residence. Permanent residence, we break down to 3 categories. The first category is the economic category. These are the categories where we basically, you get permanent residence based on the fact of your background and your circumstances, and the fact that the Canadian government feels like you are going to contribute towards the economic fabric of Canada. And so what's included in this is the express entry class and provincial nominee programs, such as the OINP. There's a caregiver program that I want to talk to you guys about. And also, if you're very talented artist or athlete, and you've been self-employed, or you will be self-employed, then we can, there's a very good category for that as well. So I'm going to be talking about these first three categories, the express entry category, the provincial nominee program, and the caregiver program today. There are two others that are two other categories. We're not going to go deep into them, but they are possibilities. One is the family sponsorship. So remember when I talked about spouses before? Well, if your spouse is a Canadian or permanent resident, one of the ways that we can get you permanent residence is if your spouse sponsors you. And also now, it depends on which way we apply. And you know, sometimes we might advise you applying and submitting to a visa post overseas, because those are fast. But sometimes if you really need a work permit to work, we can apply for you within the inside Canada category. And because if we apply for that, we can apply for a work permit right away for you as well. Okay. And then there is a refugee category or humanitarian compassionate category. One thing I do want to warn you about is if you are applying under the refugee category, you have to be very careful. If you make an application for a claim for refugee status, or even if you tell immigration that you want to make a claim and you don't even actually make the claim, it's going to be almost impossible for you to get another work permit or study permit that actually gives you temporary status, because one of the things that the government they look for when they want to give you a work permit or study permit is whether or not you're going to obey the laws of Canada and leave when you're supposed to, because you only have temporary status. If you make a refugee claim, or you say, well, I'm scared to go back, then they'll say, well, it's not likely that you're going to leave when you're supposed to. And so they most likely won't give you that work permit or study permit if you want it, okay? So just be very careful and cognizant of that. All right, now I'm going to get into express entry. The express entry to some people is a great system, and to other people, it's a bad word, okay? So here's how it works. First of all, we need to make an online profile. And in order to have an online profile and to get into the express entry pool, you'll need to qualify. And we're going to talk about how you qualify. But essentially, you qualify if you under the Federal Skilled Worker class, Canadian Experience class, or the Federal Skilled Trades class. After that, you can stay in the pool, okay? If you qualify, you get into the pool. But the trick is not just to get into the pool. The trick is really to get out of the pool, okay? Because only if you can get out of the pool will you be able to apply. Now, how do you get out of the pool? Well, every 2 weeks or so, the government has a draw. And what they mean by draw is they basically announce a number. And if your number, and everybody has a score, okay, it's under the comprehensive ranking system. So it's called a CRS score. And so everyone with a score over that number will be invited to apply. And so if you can only apply if you are invited to apply. If your score is not over that number, you stay in the pool. You can stay in that pool for 1 year. After that, they'll, they'll cancel your entry. But who cares if you're in the pool and they cancel your entry? If you're not out of the pool, you can apply. Okay, so the trick is really to get out of the pool. Now, first of all, let's talk about how you can get into the pool. Now, if you've attended some of my previous seminars, you'll be familiar with this, but let me just run through this quickly. First of all, you could qualify for permanent residence even if you haven't worked for 1 year in Canada, okay? If you have the proper work experience outside of Canada or inside of Canada, you could qualify for the federal skilled worker class if you meet the following criteria. First of all, you have to have 1 year of continuous, there's no breaks, okay, continuous work experience that's high skilled and that's full time. Full time is at least 30 hours a week, okay? So like I said, this work experience can be anywhere in the world, but it has to be continuous, at least for 1 year. Okay, for example, if I was a co-op student and I did work for 4 months and I went back to study for 4 months and then I went back to study work again, that even if I accumulated 12 months overall, it's not continuous. It won't count. Okay, and high skilled as well and full time, at least 30 hours a week. If you have that 1 year of work experience, then you need to also pass your language test. Now you can take language exams. For English, it's called IELTS, I-E-L-T-S, or CELPIP, C-E-L-P-I-P, or for French, TEF. And you need to have a certain level for your language. IELTS, you need 6.0 in every category. I don't care about your average. I want 6.0 in every category. For your CELPIP, it would be 7 for every category. TEF is a whole other matter. They have all sorts of numbers there, okay? But for English, those are the two. So you need to have that. And then we take a look at your background. We'll take a look at your education, your work experience, your language skills, your age, your family in Canada, etc. And we'll need to have at least 67 points in order for you to pass, okay? And finally, you'll need to have financial savings if you don't have an LMIA already. Okay, so financial statements, savings, it's probably around 12,000 or so for one person. The more people in your family, the higher it goes. Okay, so that's a federal skilled worker class. The second one that you can also qualify for. So these are all different 3 classes that, there are 3 classes that you can qualify to get into the pool, okay? So the Canadian Experience class is another class that you can qualify for. If you don't qualify for skilled worker class, you may still qualify for Canadian Experience class. Canadian Experience class has a lot less criteria. There's essentially 2 criteria that you need to have. The first one is you need to have qualified work experience in Canada. This work experience has to be after you finish studying full-time, and it has to be legal, and it has to be high-skilled. It has to be full-time as well, and you have to be employed. So you can't be self-employed. You can't, have your own business and employ yourself. You also can't be a contractor. Okay, what's a contractor? What's the difference? Well, normally if you're employed with someone in Canada, you will get a T4, not a T4A or T5, T4. Okay, and so that's very important. Sometimes T4As, you can make arguments for that, but for the most part, you really, really want to have a T4, okay? That's the tax document you'll get from your employer. You also need to pass your language exam. So depending on what occupation it is, the language requirements differ. Okay, in general, you're looking at 6.0, just like the federal skilled worker class, 6.0 for each category for IELTS at least. If you are in a NOC B category, those are more in the trades and administration, lower administration. Those kind of categories are in the B category. You can have a little bit lower. Then we have a third category where if you have a labor market opinion, impact assessment, and you are in the trades. So there are certain trades that are listed that if you have work experience in those trades, at least you need to have at least 2 out of 5 years of work experience in that. And you either have an LMIA or trades certification. And your language, to qualify for your language, is much lower, okay? If you have that, then you can actually qualify under the skilled trades category. So this is to get into the pool, okay? Now, let's talk about how to get out of the pool. So to get out of the pool, essentially everybody's in the pool. Now you're all going to get a score if you get into the pool. What we are looking at normally is the human capital score. That goes up to 600 points. If you have an LMIA and you have a permanent job offer, that is automatically 600 points. If you have provincial nomination, now, we used to, some people may still be in the process of applying, but essentially OINP stopped inviting any more people. But if you are already invited, or next year, if you put your application in time and they invite you to apply for OINP, you can get 600 points for express entry. Okay, most people are going to be relying on the human capital score. So let's take a look at how you can get your scores under that. The first one, and probably the most important, is your language. Really, we see this as a dividing factor for most people. If your language scores, not just your language skills, because scores and skills are different. If your language score is high, then you have a good chance. By language scores, we're looking at, for IELTS, we're looking at 7.0 in reading, writing, and speaking, and listening 8.0, okay? Or self-ed, you're looking at 9s. If you can get to that level, you'll have a good chance to get permanent residence. If you're lower, it's not to say you won't have a good chance, but there's a jump once you reach that level, okay? Your education. In general, if you have education of 2 or more post-secondary degrees, you get another level. These are jumps that we can get. If you have bachelor's degree, it's okay as well. But of course, your score basically will be increased if you have 2 or more education, the post-secondary degrees or diplomas or certificates. And at least one of your degrees have to have at least 3 years. Relevant Canadian work experience as well. If you've worked in Canada for 1 year or more, then you will have significant points. And then they look at your age. So the maximum age is 21 to 30. After 30, every year, it goes downhill. Okay, so after 30, every year on your birthday, your points will be lowered, maybe 10 points, 11 points or so. Foreign work experience, if you have foreign work experience that is high skilled, at least 1 year, then we can certainly gather some points for that. Okay, now, all of these things have to be proven. Okay, oh, and your spouse as well. Is your spouse, their education, language, Canadian work experience can also count. all of these things require evidence. The express entry pool, to get into there, you're answering a few questions. And it's kind of deceptively simple because their questions don't really seem very difficult. The problem is that if you answer it in a certain way, sometimes it's a computer system. So sometimes how you answer it will make a difference in how many points you get. The second really important thing is if you don't have your evidence to prove this, to prove your work experience, to prove your education, okay? And it's not just, I'm just gonna get any old letter from the employer. Immigration has specific requirements as to what they want in the letters. If you don't have that in your letters, and then you answer, you know, whatever, oh, I've had this amount of experience, and later on you can't get the employer to give you the letter that has the specific requirements. If you submit your application will likely fail, okay? So when we represent someone to apply in the express entry, we gather 99% of the documents first. So we can make sure that we have the evidence to substantiate every question that we answer. So that if you are invited to apply, we can be sure that your application is going to be to have a high chance of success. Okay? Now, the next thing is the Ontario Provincial Nominee Immigrant Nominee Program. This is still open for people who have high French and English scores. Okay, so if you can speak French, I mean, it looks like people who can speak French really have it good right now. You can get your francophone work permit. You may also be eligible to invited to be applied to get 600 points for express entry. Okay, you also have to have sufficient funds or job offer. And if you're approved, you get 600 more points, and so for sure you're going to go through. Now, before, there's another category. It's closed right now, but it probably will open next year. It's for those people who have over 400 points, 400 CRS points in express entry. And for express entry, and we'll discuss this later, generally the points have gone down as low as 450, but really not that, you know, it hasn't gone down past that. So people between 400 and 450, before the program stopped inviting people, had a chance to be invited to get 600 points. This might still open next year. Okay. All right, so some predictions for express entry. It's come down. Government always says it's going to keep on coming down. We haven't really seen it come down past 450 yet. Now, the minister has actually announced that they are going to announce more upcoming rules about international students getting more points, or perhaps to get more points, to have an advantage to be selected from the pool. As soon as these announcements are made, we always send them out through our email list. And so if you haven't yet already signed up, or if you had signed up before but you're not receiving emails, because sometimes we have some trouble reading your writing sometimes. So if you haven't been receiving the emails and you want to sign up, you can go to our website, lmlawgroup.com, and go to the contact page, and on the bottom there you can sign up for the email blasts. And when news like this comes out, we will be sending out email blasts. Okay, there is a program that I want to talk to you guys about that is something that a lot of people may not think about. But if you have open work permits, or if your spouse has open work permits, this might be something that you can consider. So essentially, the Caregiver Program allows people who work legally. If you have an open work permit, you can work anywhere you like, okay? Who work legally as a home care provider, where you're taking care of a child, elderly person, or a disabled person, or even as a nurse or a PSW in a nursing home. You can actually, if you work there 2 out of the past 4 years before you apply, and you pass your English exam, and the English is much, much lower than the express entry. And you have at least a 1-year post-secondary diploma, then you can apply for permanent residence. There are quotas that apply each year, but as long as you apply before the quota is filled, then you're on your way to get permanent residence, and you can also get a bridging work permit as well. Okay, so the quotas, so the caregiver program, it's not like the express entry where you qualify but you're still waiting, you're competing with other people. There's no competition. The only competition is if you apply early enough and if you qualify. Okay, so this might be something that you can consider as well. Okay, so now I do want to talk about the Ontario Provincial Nominee Program, or the OINP, that is non-express entry. Because for some people, this might still be your best choice. Okay, so remember, I said the program is not closed forever, right? It's going to be opened in 6 months, and even though 6 months might seem a long time, in immigration time just flies like that. And so if you qualify for these programs, we should be preparing these applications now. As soon as the program opens, we are going to submit that. Okay, don't tell too many people about my trick, okay? Because the more people know about this, the more people, you know, want to prepare their applications and submit it. In parental sponsorships, for example, this year, the federal government opened 10,000 spots for people to submit the parental sponsorship. Guess what? That quota was filled up in probably less than half a day at least. Basically, if you didn't submit your application on that first day, then you're out. How we prepare for parental sponsorships is essentially we get a courier to line up at 7 o'clock outside the office and have our applications in there. Otherwise, we cannot be assured that the application is actually going to be under the quota. Now, Ontario OINP, it may or may not get to that point, but certainly the best, if you want to be really, really prepared for this, you need to prepare right now and have your application ready, perfect, because imperfect applications are returned. You don't want to do that, okay? Perfect applications to be submitted as soon as the program opens. So let's talk about some of the programs. The first one, probably the one that a lot of people know about, is the Master's and PhD program. That is, if you are graduating from a Master's or PhD program in Ontario, you must apply within 2 years of graduation. The Master's has a few other requirements, but one of the nice things about this program is no job offer required. Now you do have to, when we do a plan for you, we really need to think about timing. If you qualify for both express entry and Ontario PNP, and you have a good chance through express entry, we might recommend express entry over the Master's and PhD program, because Master's and PhD programs take a long time to process. And especially now, since you have to wait until the program opens. But sometimes, if your express entry application is no good because you have to wait in the pool forever, you might never get out, then the Master's and PhD program might be a good choice for you. The other program that we like a lot is the Skilled Worker Program. And this is not the federal Skilled Worker Program, this is the Ontario Skilled Worker Program. And so the nice thing about this is unlike express entry, there is no competition to be out of the pool. If you qualify, you qualify. But what it does require in this one is for your employer to help you out. Your employer also has to qualify first, because the employer has to qualify first by submitting an application. Unlike the LMIA, the employer does not have to show they can't find a Canadian to do the job if you are already working for them with a work permit. Okay, that's really important, because a lot of employers think, well, I don't want to advertise and find Canadians. I don't want to do an LMIA. But this is not an LMIA. This one, they just have to show that if they're an employer in Ontario, in the GTA, their gross income is over $1 million. That's before expenses are deducted. Okay, gross income is over $1 million. They have 5 full-time employees, and they are in business for over 3 years. If their employers outside of the GTA, they only gross over $500,000, have 3 full-time employees, and be in business for 3 years. They also have to offer you a job that is permanent and high-skilled. Under this category, the salary has to meet the prevailing wage. That might be a hurdle that needs to be discussed with your employer, because it depends on whether or not they meet the prevailing wage for your occupation. And you have to have 2 years of work experience in that occupation, not necessarily with them, but in that occupation. If you have graduated from a program anywhere in Canada, okay, you might qualify for the international student category. So the employer has to have the same qualities, you know, the same income, the same employees, number of employees, be in business for the same number of years, but the job offer must be, and the job offer has to be high skilled and permanent. But the nice thing about that is the salary does not have to meet median prevailing wage, just entry prevailing wage, which is much lower, much easier to meet for students international students who just graduated. And you don't have to show that you have work experience in that occupation. But the key thing is you must apply, not just the first stage, but the second stage. You must apply within 2 years of graduation. Okay, so I've talked a lot. I've almost talked for 1 hour. I just want to quickly go over what you should do now. Okay, first of all, you have to plan your life. Okay, I'm telling you some of the things, but you need to have a specific plan for your own life, and especially immigration. You need to know your timelines. You need to know when you need to do certain things, when you need to maintain your status, how you're going to do that, etc. Okay? We need to find ways to maintain your status. If you want to be in Canada, and a lot of times you may have to be in Canada legally, how are you going to keep your status legally in Canada if your work permits are about to expire? Now your applications, especially for everything, for federal, it always had to be perfect. For Ontario, now it also has to be perfect if they're returning applications and there are quotas. And you know, if they don't allow you to submit your application after the quotas are full, it's especially important because you don't get a second chance anymore. Okay, so your applications have to be perfect. You need to submit your application as soon as possible. Not like I said, there's going to be a competition for when this program opens. This is the first time the Ontario program closed in the beginning, like the first half of the year. It closed in May. That's unheard of. In the past few years, it's always closed around October to December or so. Before that, it never used to even fill up the quotas because there were so many other easier ways to get permanent residence. But now, since Express Entry came in, the provincial nominee programs have really become, you know, a much, much better choice for a lot of people. And so now there is really a competition to try to get your application in as soon as possible. So I anticipate that when the program opens, there's going to be a rush to submit the applications. And so you can't wait yourself. You have to submit your application as soon as possible. And finally, yes, not all the time plan A's work, right? You know, some of you might have been planning to submit your application, and just when you wanted to submit your application, your option, you know, it was closed. Well, that's why we always plan with our clients to have plan A, B, and C. And if plan A doesn't work out, I have something else in my back pocket to use for that. Hi, Adel.
Hi, Liz. How are you doing?
Good, good.
While you were giving us all that wonderful knowledge, I have been collecting questions for you from some of the individuals that have been writing in.
Awesome.
So I have 5 questions that I want to go through with you, and these are the most popular questions that we've been getting.
Okay.
So the first couple have to actually deal with the Canadian Experience class and the skilled worker applications.
Okay.
So the first one is with Canadian Experience class, and the question is what is the minimum years of experience that I need for CEC? Can I work part-time, and does this work need to be continuous?
Okay. So Canadian Experience class is very different for the work experience from the skilled worker class. The Canadian Experience class does not have to be continuous like the skilled worker class, okay? You just need to have 1 year of work experience within the past 3 years in order to qualify, just to get into the pool. That's not to get out of the pool, just to get into the pool, okay? So 1 year of full-time work experience within 3 years. That's 30 hours a week. Now, if you have part-time experience and you add it together and say I have 2 years of part-time experience working 15 hours a week. Well, I can add those hours together and have it equal to 30 hours a week. So, and that will be enough, okay? So basically, you need to have at least 1 year of work experience. So don't get clever and say, well, I've worked, you know, for 60 hours a week. Then I only need six months. No. You can't take that shortcut. You have to have at least 1 year. So say you start working in June 1st of this year, you have to work at least until June 1st of next year, okay? But if I worked until June 1st of next year because I worked part-time, say I worked 20 hours a week, I still don't have enough hours, you still can't qualify yet. You have to have the amount of hours. So 30 times 52 is 1,560. Okay, 1,560 hours that you must have, and you also have to have at least 1 year of work experience within 3 years. That's for CEC.
Thanks for answering that question. The other question that we have on both CEC and skilled worker comes from a lot of our students, and they're asking if I'm working as a research assistant or a TA, can that count as work experience?
So that is a very good question and depends on which category. It can count for the skilled worker class. Usually when you're doing TARA, you're studying. Okay, so it won't count for the Canadian Experience class. Canadian Experience class work experience has to be after you've studied. Okay, but if you have TARA work that you have been paid for, okay, not volunteer, okay, but you have been paid for it, sometimes fellowships will work if you can only get that fellowship because you are working for your professor. That could count, okay? But that work experience, we could count it towards the skilled worker class. So you could qualify because you have TARA, and we've helped a lot of students qualify because of the TARA experience. It won't count towards Canadian Experience class, but if you have the other conditions for skilled worker class, it could help you to qualify.
Thanks. The next question has to deal with bridging work permits. There's a lot of questions here on the bridging work permits. And the question is, if I apply under the express entry stream, do I qualify for the bridging work permit?
Yes. So if you apply under the express entry stream, now what do you mean by apply? Apply means after you have gotten that invitation to apply, not just getting into the pool. After you've gotten that invitation to apply and you've submitted your application, if you've done that correctly, you should get a confirmation email very shortly after. Okay, with that confirmation email, and you have to have valid work permit, okay, or worker status, then you can apply to have a bridging work permit at that period of time.
The next question has to deal with those who have applied under the Ontario Nomination Program for Express Entry. And the question is if I have already applied for the OINP, the Express Entry one, and I'm waiting for a decision, am I affected by the quota in any way?
No. If you've already applied, now, okay, everything, I'm going to give you lawyer answers, okay? Everything has a caveat, okay? So if you have already applied, then you're in, okay? And they will evaluate your application. The only caveat is if your application is missing something, or something, it's not, and they say, well, we have to return it or we have to refuse it, you won't get another chance to apply again. Okay, so you have to ensure that your application is perfect when it's submitted, because the second opportunity, you're not going to get a second opportunity possibly to submit your application if it's refused until the program opens again.
Perfect. And this is my last question, and one that we've gotten from a number of individuals that have been listening today, and it has to deal with the postgraduate work permit. The question is, when can I apply for my postgraduate work permit? And when I get a postgraduate work permit, can I get any work permits for my spouse?
Okay, so your postgrad work permit, you can only have one in your life, okay? But if you haven't applied for a postgrad work permit and you've completed your studies, okay, then and by completed your studies, I mean the earliest of when you receive your either your transcript or a letter from the registrar saying that you've completed all your requirements. Okay, it won't be when you convocate, because that's long after. Okay, you have 90 days from the earliest when you are told that you have fulfilled the requirements of your studies to apply for the postgrad. Okay, so you have to apply within that 90 days. If you apply afterwards, they don't get a second chance. If you apply within the 90 days and something goes wrong and it's refused, you might not have another chance if it's refused after the 90 days. Okay, but as soon as you apply for your postgrad, you can actually start working full-time. If you have a spouse and you want your spouse to get a open spousal work permit, they can qualify for open spousal work permit, but you have to show that you have a high-skilled job offer. And if you don't have a high-skilled job offer and you're not working in a high-skilled job, then your spouse wouldn't qualify for the open spousal work permit.
Perfect. I think that's all the time that we have questions for. Thank you very much for answering those. To everybody who has been asking questions, I have been answering them privately. I can see that a few more have just come up, so I will be answering those online. However, if you have other questions for us, Liz will now go through the process for where you can speak to us. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you, Adel. Okay, so Adel has been working throughout this presentation in the background answering some of your questions. But what we really recommend is to have consultations with us because, you know, it's hard for us to just answer one question for you. really it should be for us to go through your entire circumstances before we can answer your personal questions for yourself. And like I said, we have to do some plans for you. We have to do planning for you and ensure that we give you the best solution there.